Rebuilding Our Land and Breaking Our Hand. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is December 10th, 2020. And on this date in history, 31 years ago today, my sweet Heaven was born. She would have been 31 today. Unfortunately, she only saw 28. So, uh, yeah. If you're wondering about the Revenger shirt, yes, this does have to do with uh, Thor's comment in Thor 3 or Thor Ragnarok. Where, anyway, this has to do with the revenge gotten by the radical Republicans. So, happy day and last day of notes for dual credit U.S. history this year. So, a somber moment of silence. Whoops, I hit stop. So, as we begin today, make sure you pay close and special attention because a lot of this has evil star information on it today. So, going from today forward for the rest of the year, and I know this is the last lecture of the semester, but going into next semester, everything that we cover will be on the star test. So, uh, if for any chance I'm playing this for one of my normal college classes, don't worry about the STAR test. You're in college. Just worry about your regular test. Remember how much they weigh. Don't take them lightly, as you know the next one is your final exam for this section. So, the lost cause. Okay, so Southerners had to do something to. You realize that no one in the world thinks that they're a bad person. Everyone thinks that they can justify what they're doing, and that they can sleep well at night knowing that they're not an evil person. Okay? So, in that same vein, the Confederates thought that they had a righteous cause fighting for independence, even though they're protecting slavery. So then they had to justify in their mind how they lost. Okay? And this is the belief that God saved the South for a greater purpose. Okay? That they had lost the war because they never had a chance, and it was their amazing fighting abilities that made the war last as long as it did. And the reason that the North would go along with this type of thing is they did enough to anger the South, so that the South declared war on them, and as part of a way of bringing them back into the fold, they had to change their tune. Okay, if you're in an abusive relationship and one of the people leave, and the other person convinces them to come back, they can't continue in the same abusive relationship. So at least on the surface, they have to do something to recognize that flaw and try and do something to make things better. In this instance, Robert E. Lee, who really personified the Southern gentleman, okay, everyone kind of wanted to be Robert E. Lee. He was a great fighter. He was a gentleman. He was a nobleman to them in a time whenever there were, basically people wanted to be Robert E. Lee. So the best compliment you could pay was talk about how, flawless his plans were and how much of a military genius that he is. And I mentioned a few chapters ago, or a few days ago, that you cannot find a textbook for U.S. history, or at least not in the last, not before the last 2 years, that says anything bad about Robert E. Lee. Okay, and is there one in the last 2 years? I'm not sure. I haven't had as much time to research here lately. So anyway, the Freedmen's Bureau. So you now have you have millions of freed slaves. Okay, so slaves don't really have possessions, they don't have land, they don't have food, and the only job skills that most of them had was working on a plantation. Okay, so this organization from the government was responsible for feeding and clothing uh, escaped slaves. So the army helped them in the beginning, but eventually they will help provide work for former slaves, schools, and colleges to train African American teachers. Uh, this program taught 200,000 African Americans to read, or basically 1 out of every 15. Okay, and this was a pretty short-lived program, so that's a pretty astonishing rate, because they're educating some of the people that wanted to be educated, and not everyone embraces education. I know you can't believe that, being in a public school where you live for the next school day. So the Wade-Davis bill, okay? So the Wade-Davis bill requires 50% of all of the adult white Confederate men to take an oath of allegiance. Okay, and this is per state, it's not for the entire Confederacy. So if you're in a state like Tennessee and you have 50% make that oath of allegiance from the very beginning, then you can become a state again. And this is pretty magnanimous of the North. Okay, if you think about this way, the South declared war. They went in. They're responsible for about 340,000 or 370,000 Union deaths. Okay, 370,000 deaths. So their act did that, and all they have to do is basically say, "I'm sorry, and I won't do it again." Okay, that's not asking for a lot. That's just asking for your promise and honor as a gentleman that you will become part of the United States. But Lincoln doesn't like this plan. He thinks it's too aggressive and will keep the United States split. So he blocks it with a pocket veto after Congress adjourns. And what a pocket veto is it's waiting until Congress is done meeting and then vetoing it, so that for them to pass this, they're going to have to start over with a new session in order to get it through. Now, the 10% plan. Okay, this is what Lincoln had whenever he thought 50% was way too much. Okay, so the 50% So if 10% of the voters took an oath of allegiance, then they would allow the states back into the Union. Okay, so anyway, this is Lincoln's plan. So you can see that Lincoln didn't want to do much. His main goal throughout all of this was to reunify the United States. Okay, so now Southerners were already working behind the scenes to try and prevent African Americans from taking prominent roles in government. Okay, and this is what leads to the Black Codes. The Black Codes were laws to keep African Americans in a condition similar to slavery. Okay, they can't serve on juries, and they're gonna face a lot of problems as they go into new counties if they're trying to leave where they came from. Okay, and if they stay, most of them don't have land. Okay, so as an attempt to organize them, a lot of African Americans went to their local churches to organize. Okay, so let's talk about Andrew Johnson. Sorry. Andrew Johnson, he becomes the president after Lincoln. We haven't talked a lot about him other than the fact that his assassin was too much of a coward and drunk to do the job he should have. The worst thing about the Lincoln assassination is that they didn't take out Andrew Johnson. Okay, those are a couple of bad things to say, right? Okay, so then I'm starting off on the right page here. Okay, so at one point he was a tailor. He taught himself how to read. In fact, he taught himself how to read and read to the level that he was able to pass the bar exam and become a lawyer, which helped him get into elected positions, eventually the Senate. And if you remember, he was the only senator or Southern congressman to continue to go to Congress after the states seceded from the Union. He brought in many Confederate states once Congress had finished meeting and said that Reconstruction was over. He also allowed former Confederate leaders to be pardoned if they requested from him. Okay, and I know that a lot of this part of the plan seems a little bit overly ambitious, but you know, Lincoln really wanted a lot less, and so Reconstruction would have been over pretty soon with Lincoln. But the fallout that happens as a result of what Johnson does causes, I don't know, I think it causes more problems that kind of echoed through for the next several decades. Where people in the South were so angry about how Reconstruction was going that, well, anyway, it's kind of a hard argument to make. Jefferson Davis doesn't get back his citizenship for over a century. So, uh, by the way, he was a very obstinate man, and he thought that the former slaves should just go back to work on the plantations. That was his solution and what to do with former slaves. So, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This gives citizenship to everyone born in the U.S. Wow, this is wonderful. We're finally moving towards a point of equality. Oh wait, I forgot. Except for Native Americans. Native Americans don't get citizenship. It also guarantees the rights of African Americans to own property and equal treatment in court. Okay. Uh, I don't know. I don't even know what to say there. But the 14th Amendment, though, this tries to fix this, and this grants citizenship to all born or naturalized in the U.S. and gives equal protection of the laws. Native Americans would become citizens in 1924, so about 60 years later is whenever they would officially become citizens of the United States. I don't know how to explain that. The Women's Loyalty League, they fought the 14th and 15th Amendments because the rights are only promised to men. And so they did a lot to try and discourage states from ratifying it and adopting the 14th and 15th Amendments. Now, the first states to ratify all the 14th and 15th Amendments are actually the former Confederate states, because this is one of the conditions for readmission to the Union, was allowing African Americans the right to vote. Sharecropping. So this is what happens to a lot of former slaves. It also happens to a lot of poor white farmers as well. And this is paying a portion of crops to rent farmland. So let's say that my name is Mr. Dugdale, and I own 100,000 acres. Okay, and a lot of people, there were some people that owned 100,000 acres in the South, and so at this point I couldn't farm all the land. I probably didn't have money to pay people to do it, but if you were someone that didn't have your own land, you could come to me and I could say, okay, well, here's the deal. I will rent you. I'll rent you my land. You can farm on it, and I get 40% of all your crops. And you're like, okay, well, farmers are really rich, so if I've got 60%, that sounds fantastic. And so we go to a deal where I'm getting 40% of the crops, and you're getting 60. So you go and you move to the land, and you get there, and it's a big open field. And you're like, crap, I need a house. Okay, so I need to get some supplies to do that, and the only person around here who has it is Mr. Dugdale. So, Mr. Dugdale, I'd like to go ahead and I'd like to buy some supplies to build a home. And I said, okay, so here's the thing, for the next 25 years, I'll take an extra, 20% of your crops to pay for your house, and then you own that's your house. Then you don't have to pay rent on it. And you're like, okay, well, 40%. I mean, I can get really rich off of that. So you go out, you build the house, and you're all ready to farm, and you get to the point where you're farming, and you're like, oh crap, I need a plow to sow the fields. Okay, so you go to me, and I'm like, okay, I'll do it, but it'll be another 10%. You're like, okay, 30%. I can make a lot of money off of 30%. So you got 30% of the crops. Okay, so then you go back and you plow the field, and you're like, oh crap, I need seed. Okay, well, I'll give it to you, but it'll be an extra 10%. But remember, next year you just hold back, about 5% of the seed, and then you can plant that next year, and then you don't have to borrow that from me. And you're like, okay, well, 20%, I can live off of 20%. So you plant, and you're like, okay, this is going pretty well. I'm going to make all this 20% here. This year and next year I'll get, about probably 30% because I have to borrow the plow again. But man, 30% I'll be making, I'll be banking here before you know it. And then the drought comes in the middle of summer, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll loan you some water from my creek, but it's going to cost you another 10%. And you're like, okay, 10%, I can do this for a year, and then next year I'll make it up. But the problem is, that just keeps people in a state of perpetual debt. Okay? So generations and generations of your family would owe me money. So, by the way, I'm not trying to talk anyone into it, So the radical Republicans. Okay, you've got two major radical Republicans. You have Thaddeus Stevens on the left and Charles Sumner on the right. Okay? And so their goals are, number one, to protect African Americans. Okay? Uh, so here's how they're going to do it. Number one, no Confederate leaders return to power. They thought it'd be a bad idea for, people like Robert E. Lee to, become the governor of Virginia, or Nathan Bedford Forrest to become the governor of Florida, that their interests would interfere with trying to create a more equal society. Okay? Number two, they want the Republican Party powerful in the South. Okay? I think that's pretty understandable. Every political party would want to make their party more powerful in the rest of the nation. Okay? And number three, African Americans get the right to vote. Okay? Three major goals. Now, one other thing I want to address on this slide before I move on, and this is Ex parte Milligan. You remember all the people that were arrested whenever Lincoln declared martial law, and some of them had been in jail for 5 or 6 years? Well, who tries them at that point? Since they were arrested for, by the government during martial law, should they be tried before military tribunals? Because sometimes what they did was considered an act of treason. But it was decided that military tribunals cannot try civilians. And at this point, they started letting a lot of these Northerners go. Some of them were really unclear on what they'd been arrested on, and anyway, there were several people that were in jail. So this lets them out. The Military Reconstruction Act. This divides the South into 5 military districts. Each one of these districts would have a Union general and 20,000 troops. So until 1876, so about a little bit over 10 years, there are going to be generals and about 100,000 men in the South. Okay, now slowly they shut that down. The last state really to lose its status as a member of the, to have this guard in their state was Texas. Okay, to get out of this, all you had to do was give African Americans the right to vote. One of the really ironic things is there were a lot of northern states that drug their feet for years on giving African Americans the right to vote. The 15th Amendment. So the right to vote should not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Okay? So this is kind of what I was talking about on the last slide. Northern states required the South to allow African Americans to vote, while if you're an African American in several northern states, you weren't able to vote. And in some states, you weren't welcome. Like Ohio had 2 laws on the book. There was one that said that it's illegal to move into the state if you don't own land or you don't have a job. And then a second law that said that it was illegal to sell land to an African American or hire an African American. So those laws basically banned African Americans from moving into Ohio. Hiram Revels is the first African American in the U.S. Senate. So if anyone's asking you who was the first African American in the U.S. Senate, you would say Hiram Revels. So, oh, happy day. Okay. Scalawags. These are white Southerners who supported Reconstruction. Okay. Why would you support this other than the fact that you think that everything's wrong? You might do this so that you can get your hands on a government job. Okay? A carpetbagger is a northerner who moved to the South for state government jobs. If you look at the image on the right hand side, you see the big fat man sitting on top of a, like a bag made out of carpet, and he has soldiers on either side. They're not there to harass him, they're there to protect him. And the woman that's carrying everything, that is Lady Liberty. So it's basically a comment on the people of the North that are taking advantage of conditions in the South to make themselves wealthy. And I know all of you are like, oh, these poor Southerners, who will protect them? I don't know if you know where we're going with this, but this is going to create the birth of something that's been foreshadowed. And that is the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was started by Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was the guy who fought in the Battle of Fort Pillow, and he massacred about 550 troops. By the way, one of the worst TV characters of all time, Forrest Gump, was named after Nathan Bedford Forrest. They would terrorize supporters of Republican governments. So these are carpetbaggers and scalawags. They would terrorize African Americans, any white Republicans in the South, teachers in African American schools, and others who supported Republican governments and equality for African Americans. So basically, they were targeting everyone. Okay. Now, if you want to laugh at them, I would suggest you. There's a great scene in Django, and you should watch that. That's pretty good. It's not there's no historical truth in that because they did that before the Civil War, which they wouldn't have been required to do. But anyway, it's just kind of a fun scene to watch. Okay, so I'm moving on. Sorry, I'm not spending more time on the KKK. I know, Anyway, I'm moving on. Okay, so let's talk about things that. So, Andrew Johnson was not a popular president during his time. Okay, he vetoed a bunch of civil rights bills that were passed over his veto. He fought the Freedmen's Bureau, and just at every turn, he was trying to stop what Congress was trying to do. So, Congress passed an act called the Tenure of Office Act. And this said that the president needed Senate approval before removing an official appointed in office. So this would mean that he couldn't fire members of his cabinet. He couldn't fire, federal judges, which of course he couldn't do, or members of the Supreme Court. But this mainly targeted at his cabinet because they knew that he had problems with members of his cabinet. And whenever he fires the Secretary of War Stanton, who had helped win the Civil War. This was all the ammunition that they needed to impeach Johnson. So, as a result of Johnson violating the Tenure of Office Act, the House voted to impeach Johnson. Now, I think as we learned earlier this year, that impeaching a president doesn't mean that they're removed from office. It starts the process of the trials to remove them from office. Okay? And so from that point, Congress will present information on how he violated his office, and then they'll take a vote. The final vote was tallied, and he ended up staying in office by one vote. And from that point forward, he shut up, he was quiet, and he went out more gracefully than some presidents. Now, William Seward was Secretary of State. If you remember, he was the guy who said we should go to war with Britain or France to bring the United States back together. Again, he was responsible for relationships with other countries. And Russia had supported the Union during the Civil War, so they needed money at the time, so the United States would buy Alaska for a total of $7.2 million. Everyone said that they called it Seward's Folly because folly is like a mistake or a joke. Okay, and this was a real shot at William Seward. Okay, so this is Seward's Folly. But in reality, the purchase of this will lead to the largest gold strike in U.S. history, and so much oil that's being pumped out of Alaska today that every citizen that lives in Alaska receives a check for $3,000. Whether you are 1 day old or 105 days old. As long as that is your state where you live over, I think you have to live over half the year there. And if you do that, then you get a check for $3,000. Okay? The cost of living is very high in Alaska, but, an extra $3,000 doesn't hurt. The election of 1876, Tilden won the popular vote, but neither Hayes nor Tilden won an electoral majority. Okay? So it was really close. Hayes was about to give up the election, but his people said to shut up and that they had a chance of winning the election. Okay? So, by the way, that's a mistype that I need. Oh, wait, no, it is. Okay. So, yeah. So, Tilden won the popular vote, but not the electoral college. There were some states that were in dispute. So, there's arguments going back and forth over the next few months, and it was finally decided to give Hayes the presidency if he pulled federal troops out of the South. By pulling all the federal troops out of the South, it would end Republican governments and Reconstruction. Okay? So Hayes then becomes the next president of the United States. A very mild, boring man with an even more mild and boring wife. So, anyway, moving on. Now, I know we touched on this before, but once again, I need to readdress this because this is something that you'll need to remember for your STAAR test at the beginning of the year. So, the amendments we went over today, the 14th and 15th Amendments, the 13th Amendment from last time, and, de Tocqueville's 5 values. De Tocqueville was a Frenchman who came to the U.S. in the 19 teens and observed what was going on over here. It was in the middle of the French Revolution, and he was looking for reasons that democracy had worked in the United States, that this constitutional republic that the U.S. had worked, okay? And he came up with these 5 things, okay? Number 1, liberty. People are naturally free, and it's the government's job to protect their freedom, okay? So that every American is free, and you have to be protected, okay? Egalitarianism, okay? All citizens enjoy equal rights before the law, okay? So everyone is basically equal before the law, okay? Individualism, okay? Society is based on rational self-interest and self-reliance, okay? So, basically, it's in your best interest to work hard to try and get the things that you want because no one else is going to give it to you, okay? And you take care of yourself and you take care of your family, okay? And the whole society is based on this, okay? If you want something bad enough, you work hard enough to get it, and you can get it, okay? Populism. The ordinary man has favor and respect, okay? Politicians need your vote, so they are good and kind to people. I know a lot of this sounds like crap, but in theory, this is the way that things should have worked, okay? So every person's important, every vote's important. And laissez-faire, dislike of government intrusion into private lives. No one wants the government involved in their private lives. They're okay if, it's something that doesn't matter to them, where they do it's okay if the government does this because I'm not doing anything wrong. But they're not okay with that for everyone. So, congratulations, everyone. We've reached the end of the semester, okay? We have a test coming up. Make sure you're prepared for it. Remember, each one of these tests counts 15% of your final grade, okay? So make sure you take care of business. Make sure you're ready for the test. Make sure that you study, okay? Do your best on the essay. Do your best on the multiple choice, okay? So Everyone have a great day, a great night, and I will see you soon. If you have any questions, please contact me. And this is Christopher Paul, MEDMA, and the end of the semester.